Welcome to the Ashland University Department of Languages and Literature's Fall 2022 poetry reading, culmination of a two-day residency that has featured classroom visits, informal meal conversation, individual meetings with multiple students, and an awesome open mic last night in conjunction with Sigma Tau Delta. My name is Chuck Carlise, or the one or two of you might not know me. I'm assistant professor of English and creative writing here, director of the National Poetry Press, and I'm here to introduce the featured poet of the evening and the week, Ryler Dustin. Ryler is the author of the poetry collection Heavy Lead Birdsong, out on Right Bloody Press, as well as the brand new chapbook Something Bright, just released on Green Linden, both of which are available for purchase after the reading. He'd also be happy to sign them as well. Originally from Bellingham, Washington, deep in the Pacific Northwest, Ryler has headlined at slam venues across the United States and represented Seattle on the final stage of the World Poetry Slam. He's been awarded residencies from the Jack Kerouac Project of Orlando and the Marjorie Davis Boyden Wilderness Writing Residency. He holds degrees from Western Washington, University of Houston, and University of Nebraska-Lincoln. His poems appear in outlets like American Life and Poetry, Verse Daily, Gulf Coast, and The Best of Iron Horse, and is currently at work on a novel, and he teaches at Albion College in Michigan. I've had the pleasure of knowing Ryler for 15 years. He probably doesn't know this, but when he came to the University of Houston for his MFA, when I was a second-year PhD student there was a tiny buzz among the then graduate students about this slam champion of the incoming class. I had never seen him perform at that point, but like many of us, I was very curious. When he arrived, Ryler was hard to make sense of. Instead of a giant presence taking over a room like one might have imagined, he was a mild, sweet, deeply sincere, gentle-voiced kid who was wide-eyed and fascinated by Carl Sagan and Jared Diamond, who laughed easily and thought earnestly and hard about what you were saying. He also ate oatmeal during class and moved into the sprawling spiderweb of highways that is Houston without a car. How on earth was this guy a slam poetry legend? About a month into the semester, there was a reading featuring a few of the first-year grad students, Ryler among them. This was the first time I heard his work or heard him read. It was like watching a lightning storm with a heartbeat. There was danger and electricity, rhythm and explosion, all of those characteristics that had seemed so disparate and unlikely, the sincerity, the wide fascination, the oddball quirks. They all revealed themselves, in momentum and surprise and somehow quiet familiarity. The poem that day concerned his father, a Vietnam vet who was scarred by his memories and still trying to learn to live with them. It was unflinching and intimate, angry and startling, full of crescendos and million-dollar phrases, and above all, patience and forgiveness. Another colleague of ours, Ed Porter, a 51-year-old fiction writer in the program and a very good writer in his own right, leaned in while we were chatting at the end of the event to tell Ryler, "I've been trying to write about my parents for 30 years and I've never gotten as close to the bone as you just did with that piece." I think there's something to that. Sometimes the most difficult work starts with listening thoughtfully, with wide-eyed, even obsessive fascination, with the courage and patience to sit in our own dark rooms, whatever yours are, and forgive. And then stand in front of a room full of strangers and throw some lightning bolts around. I could not be more pleased to hand the stage over to him. Please join me in welcoming Ryler Dustin.
Some people die under bridges, nestled up to the cold grease of humanity. Some people die in artists' flats, overlooking wide, bright-eyed cities that promised everything, delivered way too much of it. Someone in this room will probably die from a Viagra overdose and subsequent vasodilation, which is to say loss of blood pressure, shock, the inability of life to move fast enough through all their veins, which is to say they will die smiling in the arms of someone they love, at least in that moment. Some of us will die from trying to catch snowflakes on our tongues, falling on our backs into white powder, consumed by the realization that beauty melts. Some of us will die from hearing the cars pass the road near our homes too many times, or the sidewalk trees rustle once too often, because our brain keeps track of these things, like an abacus. And when the last bead is moved, some web of nerve fire rockets off transmitters that tell our body, rest, stop, it's all right, find some excuse to give out. I've seen enough. I'm full now. Some of us will die in fist brawls in foreign countries by falling at the wrong time around the wrong sort of people and being kicked in the head, which is to say chasing after the word courage. Some of us will die from wonder. Some of us think too much about Phineas Gage, about which part of us is us, and what, if anything, will remain of it. And we are consumed finally by the overwhelming, incomprehensible width of the universe. Some of us will die kissed by tubes on hospital beds, being fed intravenous math that adjusts our consciousness, our level of pain versus disorientation, and we'll have to struggle harder than we've ever struggled for anything, to look out the window between breaths of saline solution and thought-bending morphine to realize that is rain outside. Some of us, like my mother, will break the windows of our nursing homes and run into the forest to starve like rebels and heroes. Some of us will die holding a comrade's head in the ash of a battlefield, thinking in the very end about everything except for killing. Some of us will die in our sleep. Some sleep yellers like me will jab a sword down the throat of a familiar bad dream and be tangled up in the death throes of its tentacles, uprooting our blankets in private nighttime spasms, dragging our fears with us into secret glory, wrestling with the bird skeleton of our boyhood nightmares over the last sunset hill, down the cliff of ending, into the freedom of dark. That is how I have believed I would die since I was young. But sometimes wonder seems just as likely. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a delight to be here these past couple of days. I still feel charged from the open mic last night, and it's been so long since I felt that. That's what made me fall in love with poetry first, was just hearing people be vulnerable, share work, say things in the context of this that really feels almost like kind of a sacred space that you can't always say at the dinner table, or you don't always know how to say in the moment of lived life. And I didn't realize how much I'd been craving that, especially since the pandemic. So it's been a delight to be here. I have kind of a mix of poems tonight from this new book of mine, Something Bright, that is set in my kind of home region, as Chuck mentioned, in the Pacific Northwest. And I also have kind of some maybe more expansive kind of spoken word pieces, I guess, kind of scattered throughout here. And then we'll kind of see, if folks are feeling like we could, chat a little bit, have a Q&A, or just kind of share this space together. So I want to move into this poem here that is from my new book. And as I was putting together this set list for tonight, I felt like there were a lot of resonances coming through it that seemed kind of quasi-spiritual, I guess, or concerned with the idea of prayer. And this kind of comes out of that, I think. So this is called Trailer Park Psalm. Bless us, Lord of corrugated tin, of crooked windows held against the wind with mold-dark duct tape, of roofs repaired in rain that would not let up. Bless us, Lord, of all that patches, holes, is good enough. Plywood, oil, fast dry foam, my grandma's hands that worked the wood stove chimney back to shape. Bless us, Lord, of the mildewed scent my grandma raised me in, of carpets singed with cigarettes, ashtrays made from Folgers tins, of hamburger helper and discount meat in cedar-shadowed kitchens. Bless us, Lord, as we were back then, a pack of knobby boys on bikes, girls with creosote-lined eyes and smiles slick with gloss. Bless our uncooked Northwest skins, ghost white, except for Ian's, who called out, "How, white man," and punched whoever laughed. Bless Jake, his red hair lighting the street on the night his trailer burned, when he fled with his bike, his bag of CDs, his stepdad's 44. Bless Jory, whose twin sisters died and came back as raccoons. Bless John, who ate dry cat food as he swaggered up the gravel strip. Bless blackberries fat with summer rain, dark as blood from the thumbs we pricked. Bless bracken, birch, Douglas fir, the nettle's electric ache. Bless the sword fern's dusty seeds that ease a nettle's sting. Bless the cedars I climbed at dusk until our trailers looked like toys. Bless Rick in the woods with his butterfly knife, slicing only rain, unfolding his blade with flourishes he gave religious names. Angel's teeth, Lot and salt, handshake with God. Bless Dick, eyes emptied by a war we were too young to know, who guarded the mail, cigarette unlit, always on patrol. Bless the dark of North Shore Road, where Jake hid as his trailer burned, where his mother had crashed their pickup truck in snow the year before. Bless the firs that tried to stop her. Bless Jake, Lord, he went to war. Bless Jory, who left for Mexico, and Ian, who said he was heading west, though we lived as west as you could go. I think we'll kind of go on this journey through my hometown and through the history of that place. And this book begins with a poem that in some ways is kind of an origin story, I suppose. But it's also a terrible disaster that really kind of scarred my hometown. And there was an accident that happened. And if this tragedy hadn't unfolded the way that it had, I think it's possible that I wouldn't be here. And a lot of people in the town would not have survived. So this is kind of an elegy and kind of a beginning, I suppose, one of many of these bright things that happen in this book. So this is called A Secret. If a boy's palm curls to cup the whisper of flame, if he stands passing a butane lighter back and forth with his friend, it is to learn how beauty burns the fingers, how the forbidden holds inside of it the holy. The lighters hiss and click a spell, an incantation among young pines where Whatcom Creek runs below the hush of wind in cedars. Now his friend, who has carried in secret a tattered sack from the Lummi Reservation, lifts a fountain firework, lights it, and summons a shower of sparks into the dry, white heat of June. How could they know, standing just feet from the creek's edge, that the water itself would burn? Sparks blossom on the swirling current into a crest of flame, a rill of widening fire, their clothes effervescing, then their breaths, the needles of the pines incandescent. While not far from the office of the company whose pipeline had leaked, I look up from my homework, the windows of my grandmother's trailer shuddering in their crooked sills. Two boys, whose initials notched 2 desks at school, had discovered the secret leaking toward town. Had saved us all, the mayor said. Boys my own age, whose names stand on plaques in Whatcom Park. Stephen C. Orvis, Wade King. They who called a secret forth into flame, found a burning world inside our water. There was this terrible gas line explosion that, kind of rocked my hometown. And that's one of my earlier memories in that town that I can still kind of look back on and think of like this plume of smoke and hearing about it. So I guess now I want to sort of take a little bit of a journey way beyond my hometown, kind of starting with that space of childhood. I think that when you're a kid, you're attuned to the wonder that sometimes we sort of get acclimated to as adults, and we don't feel anymore. We don't notice how strange things are. And as a kid, I really loved sci-fi, and I think part of it was this constant feeling of like, I'm already in sci-fi. Like, this is weird. Like, the creek just exploded. Like, there's, you know, the world doesn't really make sense. And I remember hearing a little bit about Carl Sagan and this idea of the Voyager spacecraft. Does anybody in here know about the Voyager spacecraft or the Golden Record or heard much about it? Okay, y'all have? Okay, yeah, so, you know, it's this beautiful idea that to me kind of was keeping in the theme of tonight. And in some ways, a theme I found kind of bubbling up in this book of almost prayer, in the sense that the Voyager spacecraft feels like a reaching out sort of to something beyond us. The idea was basically to create a phonograph record, you know, the height of technology back at the time, and inscribe it with sounds from our planet and send that out into the cosmos. And even now, you know, the spacecraft is rushing far away. So this poem is kind of inspired by that. And it begins with a quote from one of the scientists who worked on this project, and her name is Andrew Yan. This poem is called Song for Voyagers. You, the farthest objects we have ever touched, now venture beyond that place where the sun's wind gives way. Andrew Yan. After school, I would sit where these shops gave way to water and woods, gripping a sci-fi book from the free box outside Henderson's, watching sun recede in passing clouds, then swell until the bay glowed like green glass. No one noticed me there on the abandoned trestle that ran along the pulp mill's graffitied walls and firs that sank soundlessly into shade. If someone came, the drunk lady, the two sisters picking blackberries, the boys on bikes with greasy hair, I kept quiet, except to share what my grandmother knew, that a woman planted the berries as she train hopped west. I stayed as long as the light lasted, reading novels set among alien suns and the windless dark between galaxies, past planets that glowed like the bay's far freighters, red-shifted or neon green, my pages dog-eared by someone else. Wheel of Winds, Planet of Adventure. One person writes a story, and another gives it away, and a boy who finds it in the bottom of a box reads it aloud, walking home in his corduroy coat, spring snow falling like the passage of stars, like photos from the spacecraft on the news that year, a probe that rushed past Pluto, clutching a phonograph of humpbacks, human songs, infant heartbeats, and our planet's fragile, shifting weather, so that wind and whales and Chuck Berry would be found by beings unfathomably far away, long after we had vanished or grown into something unimaginable. So I have just another poem I would say that I want to do, and then maybe a few more shorter poems just for a bit. And we'll kind of transition maybe into, I don't know, this quieter space, because I feel like that was one of the beautiful things about this open mic last night was there were some poems that were pretty loud and pretty bombastic or intense. There were other poems that were really kind of made you kind of have to lean in and think about what the poet's saying and had kind of a softer presence. And I love that texture. So this is kind of the last maybe of these origin story poems, I guess. And this is one I shared in Chuck's class earlier today. And it's one I really love. I still think about it when I go back to my hometown. I see this old parking lot. This poem is called First Star. It is here, in the empty lot across from Kmart, dusk falling on the cusp of summer, that you realize you love her. He has asked you to teach her to drive. You lied about having a license, and your mother's Metro is not cut out for this. How she kills the clutch again and again as you brace your bodies against the dash, laughing. You are not cut out for it either. The way she jokes with the boys at your lunch table, grin flashing, hair black as volcanic glass. You cannot ease the ache her body makes in yours no matter what you do, even when you are making love behind her mother's leaky apartment, or lying in the damp grass after, watching geese sign their mysterious arrow overhead. Soon her father will vanish again, her mother remarry and take her to Georgia. On the phone, she'll talk about pills she's started and a man she met at church, her voice fading in the sound of traffic. But blink now, and you are back in the empty lot. Blink, and you were in the brimming grass, wet, watching the geese neck ever on. Tell her again, they have needles in their noses, like compasses, guiding them to where they must go. Say you can see Sirius, the first star, though you know she is already sleeping, like something crash-landed, unfathomable, from an even deeper distance. Her breasts below the coat you both share. Her wrists so defenseless that the world, for the first time, frightens you. And you begin, in that light, to know what it is. Thank you so much. And yeah, thank you for clapping too with every poem. It's kind of, one of the interesting aspects of sort of coming up in poetry through spoken word and slam, and then now kind of finding so much richness and pleasure in, poetry on the page and maybe, academic poetry, not to overemphasize the divide between those two, which I think is kind of dissolving more and more every year that goes by in a wonderful way. One of the weird things is in the slam community, you clap, you make noise, you holler, sometimes, readings are in bars or in cafes and people get kind of ruckus, and that's really fun. And then, in the academic setting too, poems sometimes are a little bit shorter and sometimes quieter. And so, I feel like at academic readings that I go to or read in, people don't clap with every poem. So thank you for kind of, straddling that divide with me, because I know with some of the poems that are kind of in the mid-range, it's like, okay, I'm clapping again, but should I be? I'm also like trying to think about the poem and absorb it. So thank you. So I'm going to read a few short poems here. So I would say, don't clap between these. I won't stop you if you're overcome by the need to, to emote, but there, I'm going to read kind of a series of some shorter pieces. And some poems, a couple of poems that are not short exactly, but they're in kind of little segments. So you can kind of, you want, these look like pretty comfortable chairs. You can kind of lean back, relax, exhale, kind of let your mind wander with these a little bit if you want to. I'm going to start with a poem kind of in the spirit of that last one that's a love poem. And by the way, if you stick around after the reading, feel free to buy a book. I'd love to sign it for you. Otherwise, just hang out, chat. I'd love to chat a bit. I'll tell you a story about the Voyager spacecraft that's a love story, and I think one of the most romantic stories ever told. So, or maybe, depending on how long the reading goes, I'll share it at the end. But this is a love poem. It's called Love Poem with Stinging Nettles. And yeah, no need to clap. It's kind of a short one. Flash where the gutter spills to the sun-struck runnel. Could we be this changeable and true? Today, a gray dawn hung in your hair, and in my ear, your breath sounded like this, a word the whole body believes. Noon flickers on undergrowth, crow bones blown down from a cedar, and my heart, which knows for its home only wilderness, now chooses your wilderness. Your hands, red from nettles, slick with the milk of split thistles, our shins breaking sun in the creek. I have a very complex relationship with nature, I would say. And that's maybe kind of an absurdly broad statement. But I've often felt really drawn to the beauty of nature. That feels kind of growing up in the Northwest and roaming kind of in these forests, and everything is dripping. And, if you've ever been up there, moss will grow pretty much anywhere that is left exposed, so there are boulders that are kind of like lime green because they're covered in moss, and ferns are growing up from cracks and everything. So that has felt to me kind of like the closest thing to church that I really connected with when I was young. And at the same time, I think that nature can be so ruthless, and it's obviously seems to me, if you look closely at it, as writers like Annie Dillard have done so beautifully, you can't help but see that it's kind of amoral, or it doesn't have the same kind of morals that we might have as human beings and want to create for ourselves in our societies. At least I hope we want to create in our societies. And so this poem is kind of, I think, wrestling with that. And I wrote this after reading Annie Dillard's Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, which, if any of you were curious about nature, the beauty and the horror of it, I think she captures it so wonderfully in that book. So this is called Hunger. The half moon rises over the path, a low, sick, sweet note, and deer bones shine in damp weeds. My shadow slides below the lamps, a hunter whose hands hang like bagged birds. It's dangerous on nights like this to look for the Lord in his works, when hunger swells in every living thing. Dragonflies, ravenous, hawk the steaming field. Raccoons gnaw crayfish at the river's edge. A stray dog digs for something dead. Longing, the Lord must have said, will weave through this world's wet breath. Cricket thrum, feline whine, water pulse of babble and brush. The Lord's angel is his ache, a tear in the clouds where stars spark through to help the owl kill. Creation is a relentless rhythm, a looped song of longing swirled into passing forms. The season's bloom of doomed mayflies, dark arrows of sparrows in the sycamores, mantis eggs bobbing on a blade of grass, the first few hatched and feeding on the rest. Such fecund, ferocious need throbs in the filaments of feeling things, and love is not near the heart of this. It is a late, lucky appendage, unlikely as the life of one lacewing. The creek wears moonlight like a coat of mirrors, leads me past dumpsters to a marsh's dark lip where one swamp rose dips low. I follow its overgrown tendrils down to dreams glimmer and sluice, where the moon makes a wavering road on water, shines on fine fish bones, half-eaten, translucent, nudging the reeds. If there's a heaven, we will bend to examine our old selves and wonder how something so delicate was ever allowed. Thank you, Chuck. Yeah, I appreciate you. And you have that love of spoken word too. So I know that's come through. There's, let's see, one more of these shorter poems I'd like to read. And as I was kind of thinking back over all of my work, I was realizing I have some poems in this book, my first book, which is a full-length book, that kind of wrestle with some of these same questions about faith, although I think in a different way. So this poem is called Confession in a Wheat Field Approaching My Hometown. And for me, I kind of, when I go back to my hometown, I feel a lot of those questions about faith kind of well up in me, because I see all these places where my mom is Christian and, has found a lot of passion for that viewpoint. And I respect that. And so I go back there and I kind of am connected to all these memories of that. So this starts with an epigraph from another Northwest writer named Tess Gallagher. I feel, at least elsewhere, those able for holiness, its signs and rigors are at work. Lord, I listened for you where wind splits into song around needles of pines. In hymns my grandmother taught me, and the hunger music of gulls, but your voice was never clear. My family found you in a TV preacher's promise. My friends and I pretended that we were our own movies, while the patience of scientists, men and women of unflinching faith, conspired to tell the truth, which was different than what felt true. Far one, I have carried these words through rain and the strange, fine pollen of American trees, across lost highways, the deaths of friends, the wide distances of a child's humming, to this field where wind keeps rewriting your name. Light comes on in a farmhouse window, and the first stars rise from the evening's bleeding edge. This poem I wrote a long time ago, and I haven't really spoken it or shared it for a long time, but it felt kind of connected to that last piece, I guess, kind of bubbled up when I was thinking about that last poem. So, okay. If I decided to believe in angels, I would believe in street wanderers, watching us from alleyways and the sides of greasy dumpsters, hanging off of gutters, drinking out of paper bags from rooftops, muttering in the shadows about human struggles, unanswered prayers, the demons snickering between our shoulder blades. They'd communicate with each other through the curling graffiti that few of us can really understand. Warnings like, look out for Ryler. I overheard him talking to himself for the first time in 8 years about how suicide is starting to sound like another word for clean. Or Tina has picked up her crack habit again. Israfel and I saw her light up last night by the warehouse 2 blocks to the west. Be ready for damage control. She's going to start stealing things from people they aren't ever going to get back. And this time, we're not just talking about her husband's wristwatch. They'd cover their faces with knobby, frost-bitten fingers every time we'd stumble past at midnight, hoping to be sly enough to hook someone's heart at the bar. They'd grin rotting teeth and suck their stogies with joy whenever someone in tie-dye stops to help a businessman pick up the papers that have scattered from his briefcase. If I decided to believe in angels, they wouldn't have white robes that burnt our eyes like radiant salt or faces like Roman statues. They'd be braver than that. They'd be covert spies deep in enemy territory, hunted by things you and I can't see except on bad acid trips. They'd have their heads down, eyes smoldering, sitting vigilant at closing time in gasoline-painted puddles, unable to sleep for more than 40 seconds at a time, not just because they're keeping watch, but because they've seen things that only heaven could wash out of their dreams if they ever gave up and went back. If I believed in angels, they would be the ones who wouldn't go back. They wouldn't look like Filippo Lippi's choir boys or 6-winged Catholic seraphim, wouldn't part the world's darkness around them like Roman candles. They'd be scared and strong. They'd have broken bottles instead of flaming swords. They'd be fighting with shadows like schizophrenics. They'd be sending each other desperate blessings from barrel fire seances. They'd be whispering in low voices about who's going to win the war, like Jews in the shadows of Copenhagen. They'd be sending each other encoded, long-distance prayer lists spray-painted on locomotives. They'd be leather-skinned women and stocking-cap men. And only a few of us would ever notice them. Their grimy feathers hidden down trench coats or hooded sweatshirts. Their insomniac eyes scanning the streets. Their backs against the walls of alleyways, flick with names and rain. Thank you. Next poem I'd like to read is kind of jumping back to this chapbook and a little bit forward in time, I would say. But it feels kind of similar to that, you know, and when I wrote that poem, when I was thinking about these beings unable to sleep for more than 40 seconds at a time. I was kind of thinking about my dad in some ways, because he was in Vietnam and he was a ranger and spent a lot of time kind of out in the jungle by himself. And I don't think I understand, obviously I could never understand that experience, but I don't even really understand the basics. We haven't really talked about it a whole lot, just kind of bits and pieces. So this poem is sort of about that. And it's, I suppose, in a way, another kind of origin story, because I came from, him after the war coming home, and another kind of bright thing that might kind of be a disaster, I guess. This is called Memorial Day. It's kind of a shorter one again. On my father's street, branches of red buds bend with wind and the weight of new blossoms. Pink petals tumble over pavement, broken bottles, a streak of green antifreeze outside the liquor store. Everything looks young, still wet from last night's rain. A teenage boy spoons ash on a church's azaleas, the scarlet flowers shaking like flame as he stoops by the yellowed marquee. Praise the bright promise of our country, it reads above an oily ditch. At 18, my father ran away into the tang of jet fuel and napalm, but he only tells me one story, how he fell asleep by Ha Long Bay and woke with the sun stitched into his flesh. His shoulders blistered and peeled for weeks, leaving blood on the leaves where he walked. Today we'll drink beer in his kitchen, and I won't press him for more. How he got through the burn, the bullets, the booby traps blooming like brief, blind stars. Or why he freezes, hand on the fridge as if afraid the past waits inside, as if the dead and unsaid might burst into brightness, that waking of light when it's opened. Thank you. And yeah, the snap, why didn't I think of that? It's a great, thanks back to the beats for that great halfway point. So feel free to snap if you want to. Let's see. Okay, so I've got a few more actually kind of shorter pieces I'd like to share with you. This one is really just 6 lines. And one of my favorite exercises as a writer is writing a poem about a place. And we kind of pass through what Richard Hugo, the poet, called the triggering town, where you kind of go through this place and it sparks a little something. And this place was so tiny. It was really like 5 or 6 buildings that the poem that came out of it was so tiny. So this is called Riddle, Oregon. Stutter steps of a stray dog range the wind-bit pines. Past scattered trailers and the nickel mine, waste pits shine like the slag of stars. A trussed-up deer dangles from a false cedar. Possums squabble for scraps of moon. Those of you who are out the open mic heard me read this short poem that I'm not going to read tonight, but mentioned kind of when, I was getting older and soon before I left the trailer park, I started kind of going out to this dock off of the trailer park in Lake Whatcom, where that creek that exploded kind of feeds into. And the dock was so ill-maintained that it was somehow, I don't know, I guess, those of you who are maybe physics or chemistry majors understand this, but it was floating, but it was floating like 2 or 3 inches underwater at all times. So you would kind of be out there and, speaking of kind of weird religious resonances, you're almost kind of Jesus style, like walking out on water. But it's really, rotted wood underneath you. And so, I kind of leapt off that dock into this, reflected sky. And where I ended up for, part of it was Europe. I spent some time in Europe. This was a lot later, after I had started studying poetry and everything. But when I came back from Europe, some of my experiences there started to kind of trickle down into poems. And I don't know about you all who are writers, but for me, sometimes it takes a few months or a year or several years before a poem kind of settles and you realize, oh yeah, that moment could have been a poem. So this is a poem about one of those moments. It was a strange moment. There's a mention in here, let's see, okay, yeah, so there's a mention in here of ecstasy, which is a reference to the drug, which don't do drugs. You know, and ecstasy is it could be a very serious drug. But what you should do, I hope, is talk to interesting strangers that you meet and travel if you have the opportunity. So this poem is called Wood and Wire. In Edinburgh, I could not understand what the cab driver said to me as he drove me to the restaurant. And inside, the only person who would speak to me was a Lithuanian with pink hair who leaned above her wine and whispered, "Nothing is familiar." She had learned English in 10 months. She couldn't remember the day before because cheap ecstasy had scrawled so much calligraphy into her brain. On the pier that evening, 2 sunsets burned above the waves. Maybe the sky is mirrored so far north. She said she had forgotten to call her boyfriend, but didn't want to leave. She said she was building a violin, had won a grant for it, and once it was done, would ply wood and wire into new instruments no one yet knew how to play. A couple passed, and she pointed. It is the cheeks, the breasts and ass, but especially the cheeks that make women more beautiful than men. A man is the sky, but a woman is the earth, generous and whole. Every morning, she could remember who she was and some of the night before. Then her mind would loosen. Loosen, she said, until everything goes like water. Even my language has no name for this, though we have 12 words for love. Its various pitches and distances, its songs of shifting range. She said she would not remember me, though she wanted to, and in her porch light held my jaw in her thin hand. I think, how are we doing on time here? I mean, maybe 3 or 4 more poems? Does that seem good? Okay. I'm here, you know, and I'm here to chat, like I said, more. I've really felt nourished by my time here. Just chatting about writing, talking about poetry has been amazing. I have spent a lot of the past 2 years reading poems, every now and then reading about poems, writing poems. And there's something really magical, for me at least, that happens when you're talking with someone who's clearly a living human being in front of you. So thank you for that. And yeah, come say hi after the reading. Okay, so this next poem I would like to read is kind of a love poem, I suppose, but it's kind of an end of love poem. This is called In the Bones. The finback had beached a long time ago. Storm scattered ribs, vertebrae polished by sand, knuckle bones caged in black grass. All winter, as we fell out of love in the old barn, I read the long story of whales, how they were land scavengers once, like hooved raccoons who hunger drove into the sea, while you dreamed beside me and wind worked the eaves into a song. Mornings I walked past pines growing stunted in sandy soil, head cocked to hear the moaning made by the bones. The last thing they said, a vestigial hip clicking on stone, how the body wanders, writing its loss from home to home, how the bones hold hard to this history. I think one of the interesting things about love is, and this actually is something I heard the poet Lee Young Lee say once when he gave a reading, and I was like, I think like my girlfriend at the time, like, got tickets, and so we went to see him, was that even when you know, not to use like possessive language about love, but even when you quote unquote have someone, you don't really have them. You're kind of always sort of connecting in these brief moments and these flashes. But at least in my experience, and apparently Lee Young Lee's as well, which feels very validating, you never fully understand who you're with, you know, and that might be, you know, not necessarily limited to romance. It could be a friend or a family member. But people are very mysterious. And so this is another love poem, and it's kind of about the slipperiness of that, I suppose. The mystery of the other person and the kind of riddle of how do you love someone truly, knowing that you're a mystery even to yourself, let alone, you know, understanding this other person wholly. And it's also kind of about eyesight, which I think is a really interesting sense, really weird. And we were talking actually today a little bit about, or actually that was last night after the reading, I think, how the eye kind of, you know, flips the world. Well, the eye sees the world, what we would consider upside down, and the brain flips it around. You know, I've learned not that long ago that there's a part of the human brain specifically focused on facial recognition. And so, you know, if this part of the brain is damaged or injured, people often have a really hard time recognizing the people they know, which seems kind of obvious. But what's so strange about that to me is that it means that our faces are actually incredibly similar. Like, you know, I look around this room and no two faces look even remotely similar to me. They, like, I could describe them, you know, in all of this language, and they would all be very different. But you know, there has to be a portion of our brain that basically, you know, telescopes in on a face and analyzes the ratio of, you know, distance of, you know, between the eyes versus the eyes to the tip of the nose, and all these different things that make us instantly recognize someone. And if this part of your brain is damaged, you can still see perfectly well. You can describe, you know, oh, like, you know, that window looks like it's maybe like 13, 14 feet tall or something, or, you know, you can still have the full frame of spatial recognition, but it's really hard to recognize those incredibly minute differences that our brain makes us think are so obvious. Anyway, so I could ramble on about that, but this poem was kind of trying to wrap its head around some of that, I suppose. It's called The Movement of Fields. At sunrise, I run my eyes along you and collect you as a pool fills with the image of a drowned bird, as the field outside this graying farm is in love with the shape of wind. Sight is the mind making sense of the world's raw hunks and filaments, sketched in guesswork of occipital lobes, fusiform gyrus drawing out the differences between one nose and another, one cheek into the stark relief of a friend's face. Cortex showing where a ball isn't yet, but will be after the instant its image flickers up the optic nerve. We read about this, then we walk to the dock and watch waves lacerated by light. One theorist thinks language came to us through sight, not sound, that learning to read the signs of our prey in the wilderness filled us with symbols: hoof, hair, bent fern. Something can mean without being. Something can imply. Dark hair in your comb, the jade plant you watered before you left, a photo replicating your body which holds the whole ocean inside. If it's true, the first signs we learned were left by fleeing things. Every mark, a mark of escape. Every shape, the print of what's gone. And so we call these words a passage. With language, movement, absence, loss became legible. The night we met was pink gin, your grin, limbs lifting in fake fog. Your blocky script is bird prints in snow. When you're gone, your body goes on in my memory, diving into dark surf, towing something silver away. It was easy for God to make blind life. And the first seeing thing was only a little harder. But the second seeing thing, to make something that could look into something, looking into it. Downtown glows at dusk. Our hands clasp in my car. As we glide below lit billboards, you fall asleep, which is familiar to me, though I can't see where you go when I watch you. So I would just like to share a few more poems. This one, so is anybody in here currently an education major? I think, okay, nice. So, you know, I've just kind of noticed there are a lot of education majors at this college, and it's lovely. So this poem is kind of a shout out to you and, you know, to all the folks in this building who want to teach. I think that's so beautiful and noble. This is kind of, I would say, one of the last origin stories I'll share tonight. This is called For a Fifth Grade Teacher, and it goes out to Miss Ferguson, who taught me at Silver Beach Elementary. At the window, you described the sun's vast distance, and I realized how much light pours past this planet, never landing near anyone. All recess, I watched it sail above the tall pines to disappear beyond invisible stars or scrawl its name in the dust of dead moons. That was the year I lost my coat so often, Mom stopped buying me new ones. I drew spaceships as the bus shuddered past my stop, mapped galaxies in the swirl of my desk's wood grain. Mr. Alfred hummed the Twilight Zone when I walked into class. But you said I was just trying to grow more attentive, able to meet the eyes of others as they spoke. I remember when you'd kneel to meet my eyes. I still whisper what you said, how the light here is lucky. This is lucky light. This is, you know, I would say the last longer poem I want to share with you tonight. There'll be a kind of a short one after this. And this is, I think, one of the weirder poems that I've ever written. But it's one that I love to perform. And I would love to, you know, talk about how it came about afterward, except I don't think I really understand how it came about. So this is a poem called My Old Man. When you're young, love rests awkwardly against your stomach. It wears a red hat, has your left lung tied around its wrist like a blue balloon, but my love wheezes like an old man when it sleeps. When it sleeps, I cannot sleep. When it's awake, I'm even worse for sleep. The old man keeps me up. He rocks in his old chair, cursing and asking someone to feed the cats. There are no cats in my chest. The old man is crazy. I took away his typewriter because the keys kept me up all night. But now he scratches poems on the inside of my tongue. I don't know how he gets up there. He writes poems to strangers just to confuse me. He writes poems to beautiful women. He writes poems to the bodies of women and forgets to put the women in them. He writes poems to men with business suits on who have forgotten their stories aren't boring, to old ladies crossing the street and lovers crossing themselves against what their skin wants to do, to the ones who rush into love too fast, knowing it will not last, praying, Lord, please keep me strong and lonely through all of this so it does not hurt when I rip pleasure back out of my body. My old man laughs like a grandmother with a shotgun, blowing my poems out of the sky. Not good enough, not good enough. He's more like a leprechaun than a Cupid. He falls in love with buildings. He falls in love with what people leave behind them, old hairpins and new architecture and apple cores. He hoards apples in my chest, and now my chest is filled with apples. One of them is growing into a tree. The tree is aching inside of me like I'm a too small pot, and the old man is swinging from the branches, yelling, "Give me back my typewriter, you stupid punk. Look what you were doing to yourself." So I swallow harder and I type for the both of us. I type love poems to my mother that say, "Thank you for the days you smiled like a broken fountain and put my problems first." I type love poems to my sister that say, "When you have died, I will go to your hospital bed and mark where heaven was planted." I type love poems to my father that say, "This poem is clearly phrased and technical. It is not over-concerned with aesthetics. This poem reads books like The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It is like a raft from a desert island or a boy whose father beat him until he enlisted in Vietnam. This poem survives no matter what. Hopelessness crosses this poem's mind, but not its heart. This poem hopes with all its crossed heart for life. This poem drinks principles, Father. This poem coughs on itself, Father, because it is trying to be bigger than the man who birthed it. But it's just these slung up words, just these makeshift words slung up in the mouths of strangers to prop them open and let the light out. This poem is broken on your knee, Father. Take it up like a necklace, like a wire box, like a bird cage, like something functional, like a sniper rifle, like a call for backup, like divorce counseling, and place it on your bookshelf in between The Power of Now and How to Forgive Your Abusive Parents, or inside the cover of How to Forgive Your Alcoholic Father on His Deathbed, and then raise your children the way you did. The way you did, take it into your arms. The way you did, teach this poem to forgive itself so it will stop beating me up from the inside. Hold it softly in your hands like a brittle leaf, like a sunset you could eat like an orange, like the apples in our backyard, like the trees in our backyard you used to prune for us every summer, like every summer, igniting into autumn in our chests, in licks of red flame and copper wire and piano notes I want to hang for you in the sky. Thank you so much for having me. This has been an incredible pleasure, a real delight. Coming out of this pandemic and hearing your words, sharing words with you, sharing this space. I'll read one more very short poem, and then you know where to find me. And a special thanks to Chuck. So appreciate you reaching out, and the energy that you have cultivated in this place already seems exciting and evident. So it's really beautiful. All right, so this poem, maybe the last origin story that I'll share. It's only 8 lines, and it's from my grandma. It's called To Make Color. Every morning, my grandmother cleaned the Fisher stove in the back of our trailer, lifted ash in a shovel, careful not to spill the fine gray dust. Precious, she said, her breath smoking in the cold. Precious in winter's first lavender, not quite light. And you could smell it, the faintest acrid hint of ash, a crispness calling you from bed. You could watch her cap it in a chicory coffee can to stack among others, back bent from a long gone fever. The garden in spring, she said. Thank you so much.